Thousands of South African non-profit organizations have been deregistered for their failure to honor an obligation of submitting their annual reports as per the provisions of the Non-Profit Organizations Act. The Department of Social Development says the regulatory requirement is aimed at fostering accountability and transparency within the NPO sector. Affected NPOs will not be able to access certain privileges, such as tax exemption, letters of support, and funding from government donors and private institutions. Well, let's get more on this. We are joined by Mpho Mngxitama, who is the acting Deputy Director General for Community Development at the Department of Social Development. Thank you, Acting DG. Thanks very, very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to you and the viewers.
I know this has been you've been calling for people to sort out their affairs for a very long time. This hasn't just happened overnight, but we do know that non-profit organizations provide much needed services to the vulnerable. Let's talk about the processes and how much time do they have now to complain and perhaps be reinstated?
Thank you for the opportunity. So, like you correctly say, is a process. Now, the NPOs were given, let me just say, from 2012, given enough time just to comply, to understand what is the legal requirement and the responsibility of being a nonprofit in South Africa. That was done through the support, through the campaigns, through the workshops, but also through the strengthening by partnering with the partners in the legal fraternity to assist NPOs to organize their books and to ensure that they account. So it is very important for organizations to account because this is public money. Yeah. Now, if you are using the public money, accountability and transparency becomes key so that you increase public trust, and those who want to invest are assured that the money will go for a good purpose, which is a public good. Yeah. So any NPO, before we register, we do check their founding document, their constitutions, which will be their guiding document as to how are they going to run the organization and what is the financial year end. So every year, after the end of the financial year end, an NPO is given 9 months to prepare the documents and the paper and to prepare the report and submit. So each and every NPO, depending on what is their financial year end, because that is their choice, we give them 9 months thereafter to comply. Failure to submit within that 9 months would constitute non-compliance. Okay. But before we even get to the deregistration, we do send the non-compliance notice to remind them that, remember, you have defaulted. This is the notice to say you have to comply ASAP. The options that they have is that they may request for a further extension, which will be granted, or they may choose to say, we no longer want to be associated, can we be deregistered? Or if they are at the end tail of their preparation, they can submit immediately. Then they will be exempt from the deregistration process.
So for those that have been deregistered, what process can they now follow to perhaps get re-registered? Is there still an option for that?
There is always an option if you are deregistered. The deregistration is just a manner of ensuring that we comply with the legislation, because that's what the law says. Okay. You do not comply, we deregister you after following certain processes. However, with the recognition that NPOs are providing critical services in the vulnerable, where people cannot even afford those services, hence the public money is chipping in to assist those that cannot afford such services. They have the legal right to request for reinstatement, but the conditions of reinstatement would mean that you still have to submit the reports. Yeah, once absolutely. You submit that report, we will reinstate you after we have checked that everything is in order with that organization, Elian.
And that's fair enough. I mean, you know, any company, it doesn't matter if you are an NPO, any other kind of company, you need to submit your financials. I mean, you've issued, the numbers I've got, please correct me if the numbers are wrong, 41,787 notices of non-compliance to NPOs. Of this number, 6,221 have deregistered, that have been deregistered. So I imagine if you've been deregistered, you cannot continue with life as usual and your work as usual within the communities, and you need to make sure you're back on track. Is that correct? I mean, if they continue to work, what penalty can they face?
So it is correct, but then that is associated with the risk. You stand a risk of losing your funding because the funder can withdraw their funding. You stand a risk because you're dealing with the vulnerable. Are they protected during your services? So an NPO is putting itself at risk in terms of what would happen in the event something happens to those that are providing a service and you are not recognized as a legitimate, compliant nonprofit. But also the funders might say, we really don't need to give you money because you are not accountable. So accountability ensures that the trust is there, but also we're also pleading with the public to hold these NPOs accountable because they're servicing them. So there's nothing wrong to actually request accountability and transparency in those NPOs, particularly because this is public money. It's public funds that the NPOs are utilizing, and therefore it is important to be accountable to increase the public trust.
And it is important that these rules and guidelines are followed because there have been, and this is where I want to sort of get a little bit deeper, because now we know the process of why these companies have been deregistered, what they have to provide to stay registered. And the reason behind all of this is a very important one. And it's one that actually relates to money laundering and terrorist financing if, in fact, they do not submit to, to you these relevant documents. So my question to you is, how big is money laundering and terrorist financing through NPOs?
This is a global phenomenon. It's not only immune to South Africa. Everywhere in the world, NPOs have been proven to be used as conduits for the money flow, for issues of terror financing and money laundering. So to curb that, it is important for every country to understand what is the risk profile of the NPO sector that are registered in the country. Hence, it is important for us to know what services are you providing, who is your funder, how are you utilizing the funds that you are given, because money laundering can come from just a giver who's saying, I want to give you money. We have seen that during the COVID, people were promised monies from nowhere, and you don't know what risk you are incurring by accepting money that you don't know where it's coming from, because it's not coming from a reputable institution. You don't know the conditions thereof, and you might put yourself and the beneficiaries at risk after you have received that money that may come with conditions that you are not ready for. So this is a global phenomenon. Hence, it is important for us to understand where is the money going. And terror financing also has been proven that it is used, NPOs are used to fund such. Sometimes NPOs are aware, sometimes they are not aware. Hence, we have embarked on an awareness campaign for them to understand who they're associating with, for what purpose. And if anybody comes and say, I want to give you money, there's no free money. Unless there are conditions. Therefore, they have to be very careful. Hence, we are strengthening and enforcing accountability and transparency.
May I ask you, are there any known cases where deregistered NPOs were directly linked to terrorism and criminal activities?
Fortunately for South Africa, we are not there yet. However, what we have done an assessment on the risk of NPOs. What are the characteristics? Because not all NPOs would fall into that trap. But we as a country, we have to know the characteristics. We have to know the shape and form of such NPO that are vulnerable, because anyone who wants to do such activities, they look at specific things, the characteristics. So we have done that assessment. We know the characteristics of such NPOs, and those are the ones that we are looking like a hawk to ensure that they are not being used knowingly or unknowingly, as it were.
So besides, obviously, this side of it, the terrorism and all these illegal things that, may happen and result in this, there's also the issue of South Africa's grey listing. And I know we're working tirelessly to get out of that after the FATF put us on that grey listing. This is just one of the processes as well that needs to be followed to clear our name, basically.
Correct. So during the assessment, we were grilled on the NPO sector side because the measures that were used is recommendation 8. So South Africa, at that time, we did not even comply, or we never met the standard of recommendation 8. Hence, one of these measures is to strengthen our compliance rate so that we meet the standard. Recommendation 8 is very clear as to what countries must do, how they must work with NPOs, and we are actually, initially we were non-compliant, which means that it was a zero met. Now we are partially compliant. Our strive is to be fully compliant with recommendation 8. That will also assist us to contribute to the getting out of the grey listing, as it were. So we have been working with the sector. Fortunately, they do understand the importance of complying with that, because for us, it is more about the security, but also the protection of the citizens of the country, as well as the NPO. So they need to know where they stand, and they have to understand that we are doing this to protect them and to give them more information on the chances of them being vulnerable to such incidences.
And this is vital. I mean, it is vital that we protect these NPOs, but we also protect the country from these mischievous ways that are infiltrated into the country through all kinds of mechanisms. But I know we saw earlier a graphic of the provinces that are the most defaulted in terms of the registration process, and they are means to get through this, as you've mentioned. My final question to you is, obviously, what do you foresee the future? I mean, what is the way forward for NPOs? Because we've also seen the funding freeze from the US, and this is also for international donors that do come and help NPOs. But going forward, what does it look like, the NPO sector?
Let me start by saying that the NPOs are here to stay. And their services are very important, are very critical. For as long as we have the vulnerable in our society, NPOs will remain relevant. We have seen how NPOs actually assisted pre-1994, and the same principles still apply, but now we have to make our people better in terms of development. What we are doing, we do recognize also that the fiscus is shrinking everywhere. Economic outlook is not good. However, we are pursuing and working with the private sector just for them to understand and see the importance of investing in the NPOs. However, the private sector is very pedantic on where the money goes and what are the return on investment. Hence, we are making sure that the accountability and transparency is enforced, because nobody wants to be associated with non-transparency and non-accountability.
Absolutely.
So we are increasing their governance, and for them to understand what it means to become a member of an organization. What are your responsibility when it comes to financially and duty of care?
I have to leave it there, but thank you for the advice that you've given, and I think that these are important facts that people need to know when it comes to your NPO. Mpho Mngxitama, Acting Deputy Director General for Community Development in the Department of Social Development.